Welcome to an invitation to sisterhood. We want you to join us on a journey as we discuss everyday issues affecting our lives. Women in the Bible and of Christian history continue to have an impact on the world even years after their deaths. We can learn so much from them today. They are sisters of inspiration, and we're all sisters in Christ. Today, we're talking with Karen Irvin, the principal of the all-girl Catholic high school in Wixom, Michigan, called St. Catherine of Siena. We're talking about raising daughters as the feminine genius. With us today are my co-hosts, as always. May Simon is a catechist and artist, and Nicholas Bashi is a therapist and writer. The sister of inspiration for today, for this show, is St. Catherine of Siena. She was born on the Feast of the Annunciation on March 25th in 1347. And she was born in Italy. She was the 24th child of 25 children. 24. Have that resonate in your head for a second. Catherine was known as an imaginative, idealistic, and outgoing child who was fiercely independent. She began to have a personal revelation early on in her childhood. Catherine consecrated her virginity to Christ at the age of 7 years old. Can you believe that? And began wearing the Dominican habit at the age of 16. She was taking the vows of poverty and chastity and obedience. She took care of the sick, especially those with the most repulsive diseases. She served the poor and dedicated her life to the conversion of sinners. She lived in a century when chaos ruled the church and society. Early on, her passion was to know the truth. She took precedence over everything else, and she made that a pursuit in her life. Her profound love of God and the charity with which she expressed this have transformed the society around her. And that's what we're talking about today, St. Catherine of Siena, as we bring in Karen Irvin, and as we talk about the feminine genius. And also, St. Pope John Paul II also talked about the feminine genius and what this means to us today.
It means a lot to us. It has everything to do with our identity as women. The term feminine genius has to do with our inherent dignity as women. And it's important to note that every single woman, regardless of where she comes from, what her experiences have been, what messages she may have heard from other people, regardless of all those things, every woman has that inherent dignity, and nothing can ever take that away.
Because it's given by God himself, the creator.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So as we're talking about raising girls as feminine genius, what does that mean? We're all mothers.
Sure.
We're all mothers of daughters. And, Karen's going to come on and talk about being the principal of an all-girl Catholic high school. What does that mean to them as feminine genius? But what does that mean to you guys as moms, as having daughters?
Well, my whole parenting approach and style, and even the way I pray as a parent for my kids, but for my daughter as well, it all changed when we had our first Endow class years ago, and we discovered what, the meaning of the feminine genius. And discovering that on a personal level for me changed how I started to parent my daughter, where prior to that, I was going by kind of like not a secular way of raising her, but what do I think she ought to be doing? What do I think her goals ought to be? And it was all centered around myself as a mother. But when I learned about the feminine genius and the inherent dignity and worth and really vocation for every woman, that's when my parenting changed. And so it's very much guided by that perspective, as far as what I say to her and how I, discipline her.
Just raising your kids in general. Like, first of all, I have a 7-year-old,
Yes.
right? Your daughter's in junior high. You have an adult.
I have a 21-year-old.
So our
Right.
perspectives of that feminine genius are going to be different. Like, you can have a more different conversation about the feminine genius with a 21-year-old than I can have a 7-year-old.
Absolutely.
Yes, but the application and teaching and living it and encouraging it is totally the same, because the feminine genius didn't just come about. It started out in creation itself. So it's always been there. We just need to access it and be aware of it. And so while you have a 7-year-old, you have a 13-year-old, and I have a 21-year-old, nevertheless, as women, as parents who are aware of that inherent dignity as being the daughters of God, we love our daughters more than ourselves. And we think and want what's best for them. However, we are not perfect, and so God knows, he loves them so much more than we, and knows really what's best for them. So with that in mind, the way I raised my daughter is the same. Yes, true, you speak to them, your conversations are different because as they grow, they go through different stages and obstacles and challenges. But at the same time, what does remain the same is that from the time they're little, just like when we plant a seed and then we water every day, that feminine genius really is just helping them to remain in God, really. To me personally, to remain in God throughout their entire life, from the time that they're, especially when they come to reason. And so everything that comes our way, whether it's in their life personally when they start in school or as a family, everything is pointed to the perspective in the direction of what do we do best, that is good, that would benefit all, not just us. How do we grow? How do we keep God in the picture? How do we interact with others? So it is always the same messages. It's just that these messages become more
defined, I think,
defined as they get older. And so that's, to me, what the feminine genius is.
And you can incorporate that at different stages of their life, because society is going to influence them and take them away from God at many different points of their life, right?
Society,
to society. And even at as young as 7, my daughter will be influenced to focus on things that are away from God, just as your daughter at 13 and your daughter at 21. But then we use the feminine genius as teachable moments. You know what I mean? And so it's going to be a constant battle that we face. We face it, let alone our daughters are going to face it, right?
Absolutely, we're growing with our daughters.
Yeah, we're growing with them.
As women, as women, that feminine genius is constantly growing and being challenged, as you said, in today's world through our daughters' obstacles and our own obstacles as parents. But what we always need to remember and focus on, for me personally as a parent, is, again, I go back, I'm probably going to repeat myself. Okay, my God loves my daughter so much more than I. So I continue to pray for my daughter throughout her entire life and to guide her to what God would want her to do. But at the same time, to use her reasoning in situations, but keep God in them. And so, for example, in high school, she went through quite a few challenges. Normally, usually, hopefully our daughters, portray and relay the messages that are being sent to them at home, so that when they go out in the world or they are in high school, when these other things come, they recognize that this is good and this is not good. And so when she got to high school, it was so difficult because not everyone is aware of that. Really, as mothers, we have to be so aware, and that's what we're able to equip our daughters with, what we're aware of. And so when she got to high school, it was so difficult with friends, because as girls got older, they were making decisions that she recognized as not good decisions. And being aware of her value and what God would want for her, she chose not to do those things. And so to some degree and extent, she was isolated for a time during high school because that was, and so I think, at the same time, while we do try to parent, these are the obstacles that come our way because not everyone is aware of that.
I think you made a good point, May, especially when you said that, you're raising your daughter and you're teaching her the ways of the faith at home with the hope that when she does go out into the world that she's going to take all of these things with her, especially her identity. And I think that's a point that is really important, is that, so we can't teach something that we don't know, or we can't pass on something that we do not know.
Right.
And so, so as parents, it's so important for us to have a sense of what the church teaches, especially when it comes to, raising our children, the role of each person in the family, because you can't share with somebody else what you don't have.
Yes, absolutely. And especially as mothers and women, how we interact with other women, what we say about them in front of our daughters, and what we see in them, and relay that relate to our daughter as to how what a woman, what those feminine genius, what the value of those women are, because ultimately that is the feminine genius. It is the value and the dignity of each created woman. It's so unique to each one, because each one of us was given or created.
And it starts with self, because
Yes.
I think if your daughter's also going to sense the lack of confidence and love in yourself, and really that comes from the feminine genius, and knowing that you are loved by God. He brought you into this earth to serve a purpose that based on the feminine genius, and if you're confident with that, it's going to resonate with your daughter.
Yes.
But if you're not confident in that, if you don't have that relationship with God and that confidence in that feminine genius, you're passing that down to her, and she goes out in the world not confident, knowing
Absolutely.
truth, knowing
You're
what's right.
exactly right. It's when you know God, when you know who you are and why you were made, that you were created with so much love. I mean, if you really think about it, oh my goodness, Jesus didn't just, Jesus died. If I was just alone on this earth, he would have done the same thing to bring me back. He's a parent. God himself is a parent. And so, if we imagine how much what we would do for our children for them to be happy, right? Because ultimately that's what we want them to do. How much more does God, has God given us? And we can only give so much to our own children in this world that we live in. How much more has God given us? And that is what that feminine genius is. It's that entire, complete unity of like joy and God, of who God is in my life and in the eternal life to come, hopefully.
Yes, and then helping your daughter at different stages know that in herself.
Yes.
And maybe she brings other people to God through understanding the feminine genius.
Absolutely, and I bet your 7-year-old has brought some kids and other people to God, seriously. But it's that confidence and that whole idea of everything that the feminine genius stands for that really empowers us to be able to go out in the world and to help our daughters understand their identities so that they can go forth in the world, as St. Catherine of Siena said, and set the world ablaze. That our daughters we've been given this power as women through the Holy Spirit, and we have to make our daughters aware that they have been entrusted and gifted with that same spirit to allow them to do the same thing.
I know, and if St. Catherine of Siena could, at the age of 6 years old, decide that she's going to consecrate her life to Christ, how powerful at 6, then our daughters at a young age can make that decision to be the feminine genius that God created her to be.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We're continuing our conversation about raising girls in a feminine genius, and we're talking about raising girls and talking about Catholic school, and St. Catherine of Siena is our sister of inspiration for this show, and it's so fitting to have Karen Irvin, the principal of St. Catherine of Siena, an all-girl Catholic high school right here in Michigan, coming on next in the next segment to talk about raising girls in a Catholic school. Stay with us, everyone. And welcome back to an invitation to sisterhood. We're talking about raising girls as the feminine genius. And to join us is Karen Irvin. She's the principal of St. Catherine of Siena right here in Michigan, in Wixom, Michigan. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a real privilege.
A new Catholic school, but it's going really well.
Yeah, it is.
And we talked about St. Catherine right here on the show, and her ministry and what she meant. And your school is based on her philosophy of St. Catherine of Siena.
Yeah, so actually the motto that we have on the school crest is upon knowledge follows love. So what you can see in St. Catherine's life is that she devoted herself to what it means to love Jesus Christ and to preach his good news using the authenticity that she was given as a daughter of God. So many of the things she did in her life, her boldness and her charity and her zeal are things that we really want the women of St. Catherine's to embrace with real freedom, that they get to be who God has created them to be and go out into the world.
And what challenges do we see today, or do you see today at the school, of raising girls as the feminine genius in this motto of St. Catherine of Siena compared to what we're influenced by society?
Yeah, I don't know that we have a real sense of what it means to be women anymore. I know that might sound odd, but really what we've seen increasingly over the past decade is that we have lost that innate sense of what it actually means for us to be women. You know, something has happened in the feminist movement, I think, where women have, instead of embracing their uniqueness and their identity and the gift God has given them, they have instead felt like they needed to compete with men. So the interesting thing always in working with young women, in a sense, is what it actually means that God created us as the helpmate. You know, I think we see that as a nasty word. Women were created to help men. And
Subservient.
oppressive. Wives, be submissive to your husbands, and we latch onto that word submissive without really understanding what it means. It doesn't mean that we get beat up in relationship. It means that we actually have the responsibility to make men holier. That God created us, you know, to do that. And many young women are literally selling themselves to be loved, rather than recognizing that there's a way for them to have that dignity and stand for what love actually means.
Don't you think too that having that God created Adam first, that since he was created first, he initiated that love towards the woman, and the woman responded to that love. And so wouldn't you say that also fits into the terms, you know, as to how it was being explained, you know, when God created and woman as the helpmate to complete?
Yeah, the woman was supposed to receive love and be able to give it as a sincere gift of self, because Adam needed it.
Yes.
You know, it's funny when you reflect on the Genesis story, women get the bad rap. You know, Eve's the one that tempted it with Adam, with the apple, and, you know, everything kind of fell from there. I actually heard a monk give a talk about Adam and Eve. And he said there's a part of the story that I think we forget, which is that Adam was created and given dominion over all of the animals. So why was the serpent there in the first place and able to tempt Eve? You know, so it's this completion that the two were always supposed to have with each other. Where the man was supposed to protect and care for and love the woman, and she was supposed to always build him up.
Exactly.
But something happens, you know, in our culture, in our world, where we just duke it out with one another rather than embracing what's within.
And which, in essence, affected our sisterhood. So not only does it cause tension between man and women, it causes tension between friends and sisters. And you see this, you know, that in an all-girls school is that you have to build up that sisterhood. So we do back each other up and help each other out.
Yeah, so the temptation, I think, for women is to be really competitive. And one of the gifts, you know, being at a Catholic school like St. Catherine's is you're wearing a uniform. So everybody, the playing field just got leveled. And what I love is that the girls roll out of bed, you know, they're not putting on makeup or doing their hair, they're just walking in the door, you know, to spend the day with each other. So it's little things like that, and then other ways that we have worked to have that sisterhood. You know, one of the things we've done is we've created small groups. So we have assemblies periodically, and we'll bring up a topic, and student council will develop what the topic's going to be. What are we going to discuss in small groups? And they're from the 4 grade levels. So the seniors are the leaders of the small group, and they might sit down and discuss, you know, maybe challenges that they're having in their family and what does it actually mean to be a family. And then they sit in the small group and they discuss things that they're confronted with. But those are ways I think we can really break down how we tend to isolate from one another, or maybe think that our way is the only way, and we don't have a sense of community amongst other women to say, hey, when I'm struggling, I need to reach out and have somebody else help me. we like to keep our problems really, boxed in with ourselves rather than realizing we need to pray and engage with each other.
I really love the fact that you're putting the girls in groups that way, because we were talking earlier about how it's so affirming to be in a group, and especially with other women. And for the girls, I can only imagine how that ends up breaking down any judgments they have, or any competitiveness, like you said, and to really help build and edify that sisterhood that you're trying to create. How often do the groups meet?
Every couple weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, so we
That's a
try,
beautiful thing.
we're really working to make it be something that's an organic work of the Spirit. So student council is pretty attentive to recognizing, okay, we see things happening, or I'll see things happening with the girls, or something will go on outside of school that we feel like we need to address.
Yes.
What types of obstacles have you noticed are most common that cross the girls' paths in their life experience, going at that age especially? What are some of the main obstacles?
Yeah, so I think there's a rite of passage maybe, or maturity that happens in high school, or that the girls assume should be happening in high school, in particular the relationships they have with boys. So a lot of the sexual temptations that come up once they start getting involved in relationships, or having crushes on boys and being exposed to different things, they don't know what's right or how to behave. So they're learning one thing in the home, but they're watching their peers do something else, and society is showing them something else than what I'm assuming you ladies are teaching, your children. So it's really important then for us to discuss those issues, to empower them to say two things. One, this is the truth, of the situation. And two, you're not alone in making these good, healthy decisions.
So then, would you say, based on that obstacle, would you say then, as parents, should we monitor because obviously there are so many messages out there, as you said. The culture really emphasizes to focus on self and to focus on the exterior. So would you say then, as parents, what can we do? Because, obviously by the time they reach that age, certain messages have already been relayed. What do we do to prevent that? Do we monitor their music, or their, even fashion? I mean, you look at every fashion magazine and they tell you this is what you should wear, because this means that you're beautiful, and this is what you should listen to, because these are, this is the in group or whatever. So what do we do? What do parents do?
Yeah, so it's a balancing act, honestly, that depends a lot on the personality of your child and on the way that you have been raising your family. But one of the things I often tell parents is having that sense of what's being too sheltered and then what's being reasonable. So I think the inclination sometimes is you want them so sheltered, they'll never have an iPhone, we're not going to have the internet in the house, we're not watching cable, and at some point, they're going to break out of that. So it's all right, so what's reasonable? And there's ways to put, safety checks on cable and on the internet, and you can limit the cell phone use. And, what I've encouraged a lot of parents to do is there's times of the day when the cell phones should all be on the kitchen counter. Nobody should be sleeping with a cell phone, in their room or a device. And there's a lot of kids that'll be sending pictures and texting all night long, because that's just a part of what they do now.
That was actually a statistic that came out, a research study. There were so many teenagers that were sleeping with their cell phone that it was actually disrupting their sleep and their cognitive skills at school. And so they would wake up even to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and check their Facebook at 3 o'clock in the morning. And it was becoming disruptive to their education. They weren't learning in school. And that was a recent research study. And I think that is alarming, because at 3 o'clock in the morning, a parent can't monitor what their kid is watching on Facebook, There's only so much we can do. I love the fact, going back to your point about these small groups, and your point, too, May, and Ikhlas's point, is that now you created a very secure, trustworthy environment to discuss these things that maybe the girls didn't feel comfortable discussing. And now they can go to school and say, hey, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that feels this way. And sometimes they just need to hear another girl experience the same thing, you know, on these issues. And especially when it comes to boys.
Yeah, it
think.
takes away some of the isolation and the aloneness. Yeah, one of the gifts I've been able to have is to go into like the theology classes and talk to the girls specifically about sex and relationships with boys, so we can have that real conversation that's up here. And what's always amazing to me is they're not having the conversation at home. So what we'll talk about together is I'll pose that question. So you're with a boy and you guys are sitting on the couch and it's getting hot and heavy. How are you going to respond to that? Because they would articulate walking into the room, well, I'm going to wait, and have sex when I get married.
Yeah.
Or someone would say, I'm not really sure what my position is on that. I have to be in the situation.
Yes.
That's scary. You want them to be armed with having had that conversation with you to say, okay, let's say this does happen at a party, or you're with this guy and he's really attentive to you and you just feel like this is going to go nowhere good and nowhere good quick. What are you going to do? You want to have those conversations.
That makes total sense because, when our kids do homework, when they're little, we sit and help them learn how to add 2 plus 2, right?
Yeah.
And as they get older, we might teach our sons how to maybe fix a mailbox. If my daughter, I had to teach her, she loves baking. I had to teach her how to measure. So we take the time, I guess maybe parents don't think that they really should talk about. A lot of parents think that, because I have these morals or this is how I've lived my life. They make the assumption that their children automatically know what's in their head and that they're going to walk the same path. And so you're saying that parents really need to have these discussions in detail.
Yeah.
What other?
How to do it, because not only are they maybe making that assumption, they just may not be comfortable.
Right.
I mean, I learned about the birds and the bees not from my mom.
Right.
Yeah.
I learned it from my older sisters, and I was fortunate to have 4 older ones.
Right.
But there are girls that don't have that don't have anybody around them, and the mom may not be comfortable having that conversation with her daughter. And I think it's really important because those situations can arise. I mean, we just saw recently a girl going on spring break and she was attacked. I mean, did no one ever have the conversation with her? You can't walk around in a strange city alone. It may seem logical to you and I, but does it seem logical to a 17-year-old? Probably not. And so sometimes we're just not comfortable having those conversations.
I think your question is so important when you say, how do we have those conversations? Because I know we've all, discussed the issue of, her body and her sexuality and her femininity, but it struck me when you said that you go into the class and you actually, bring up a scenario. I don't think I even thought like on a practical level to say, oh, well, you find yourself in this situation, what are you going to do? Because of course we're telling them, the virtues are going to help you resist temptation and all that, but on a very realistic level to have that conversation,
Right.
How does that affect the mother-daughter relationship or the father-daughter relationship when they do have those talks? What do you notice, having educated and counseled girls? What have you noticed?
It makes it real. Yeah, so what I would counsel parents to do is not to have a relationship with your child that's on the surface, but one where you're really diving in deep to know what's happening up here and in here. I think it's really easy to educate and work with our children up here. It's a lot harder to do it in the heart because those are sensitive topics, so you had asked, well, how do you make that happen? How do you facilitate the conversation? I always advocate in one of 2 ways. Either you use your sisterhood, your community, your family, your extended network to say, hey, you call your sister and are like, when we're there on Sunday, I'm worried something's going on. Will you check in with her and start asking her those questions? You know, like your mom said that you're interested in a boy. How's it going with him? Because you know this already. Aunts have a plug-in usually
do
that's
that in our
easier.
family.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Oh
we do
yeah,
that.
you do it all the time.
My aunts have called me and said, "Can you call so and so and talk to her about this?" And
Yeah,
That
or
makes
look on
sense.
her Facebook
yeah,
page.
oh yeah, I get asked to look on
Because
Facebook
especially
all the
for
time.
daughters maybe whose mothers are not necessarily open, if their mother suddenly
Right.
out of the blue starts to
Right.
have these deep, intimate conversations, they're going to be like, I don't want to talk to you about that.
And
Where is this
especially-
coming from?
Yeah. Especially now more than ever. It takes
Right.
a village.
Yes,
Yeah.
It
it
takes
does.
a
Yeah,
village
100%.
now more than ever.
Yes.
Because there's so many arrows getting thrown at the family.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Well, even if you have great relationships with your daughter, like Ikhlas does and May does and I do, there's still some things that you know your daughter doesn't want to talk to you about, or she's more apt to be more comfortable talking to an aunt or an older cousin because you're mom. You know what I mean? I don't want to talk to my mom. It's not that we don't have a good relationship. It's just that sometimes you don't want to talk to your mom.
And
Yeah.
you as a mother have that natural instinct where you will know that.
Yes.
You know, what button can I press or door can I open and what should I handle a different way? It's just being attentive to when you need to handle it. The other easy way is kind of what you did 5 minutes ago where you said, I read this story where this happened. I don't know that my daughter would be able. So you bring up the story and say, honey, you know, I was reading this in the paper the other day. If you were in that situation, how would you handle it?
I like that because I do that all the time. But then I say, you know, I heard about this, and then I automatically throw in what I think they should do.
Right. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Versus opening it up like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and let them talk about,
Correct.
you know, where would they be. I did that recently with my nephew who's in high school, and I sent him this video that these high school girls did that was pretty kind of sexual video, and they thought it was cute and funny, and it went viral. And I sent it to him, and I said, hey, did you see this? I just wanted to see his reaction. He goes, yeah, I did. Pretty stupid, huh? And I said, yeah, not a smart thing for these girls to do. He goes, yeah, I don't know what they were thinking. And I just wanted to gauge where he was at. And I talked to him a week later, and I said, you know, anything you could put out in the viral world could come back to haunt you. You can't erase it anymore. It is out there, and it can change your life. And sometimes you just need to see where a kid is thinking, you know, by using those examples. I think it's a great idea, Karen. I mean, and you come from a therapy background, so you counseled a lot of people prior to becoming the principal.
Yeah.
Do you see a lot of the issues that that we faced 10 years ago still applied today, or is it getting much worse with technology and raising girls today?
Yeah, so I previously worked as a counselor in a public school that had over 2,000 students in it. And one of the things that we noticed, actually the trend in the last 10 years, is it used to be that you'd see sexual behaviors start in later high school. And when I left public education, we were seeing it, you know, in the 7th grade, where they'd start engaging in these behaviors. And honestly, I really think it's because of the way society has normalized sex and made it as if this is what it means to be a person. Like, this is how you know that you're an adult and growing up, is you need to have done A, B, C, and D.
That's interesting. You know, one of my relatives had an issue with her second grader who goes to a Catholic school. And when it was something where she felt she had to address the principal about, that's how disturbing it was for her daughter who's in second grade. And I thought it was very disturbing that the principal said to her that the types of behaviors that her daughter had been subjected to by another student in the second grade, she said these behaviors, they're seeing as the years go by, she is seeing them earlier and earlier, and the children are earlier and earlier losing their innocence.
Correct.
So I'll be honest with you. I mean, I feel so overwhelmed sometimes when it comes to, you know, putting those boundaries on, you know, with the kids, with the technology, and with you know, the music and the television and the, you know, video games. I just feel like it's just so much. But truly, then I have to remind myself it's a spiritual battle out here, right?
So going back to, you know, just trying to raise our daughters to really live the feminine geniuses that they're supposed to be. Can you tell us a little bit about what the roles of the parents, the role of the father, and the role of the mother, how they can help to promote that?
Yeah, so I'm going to attack it, I think, a couple different ways. One is really helping your child know Jesus Christ. Like when you talk about the spiritual battle, that's what their armor is. You know, that once they have encountered Jesus and they know that he's their go-to, so to speak, then everything else in their life keeps planting them on that same path where it's easier to grow in virtue because you know who's helping you and where the virtue's coming from. You know, the grace of the sacraments and the peace I think you can get from the church.
Sure.
Yes.
You know, and knowing that you're claimed, that you're loved, that God's merciful, those are important things for them
And
to
the
know.
confidence you need to go out in the world.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That you're already bought at a amazing price. And so you don't have to sell yourself to a guy because you've already been won by somebody. So having them have that confidence in Jesus. But then also I think it's really important for parents to show family and show relationship. So you may not realize how much you impact your children just in your marriage. The way that you relate with your spouse, you know, and the way that you relate to your children. They watch everything, and that's how they learn. In particular, young women really learn about who they're going to be dating and how they will be in a relationship based on their father. So, like, my mother trained my dad when we were little. He wrote all of our birthday cards. You know, she never signed a single one, and he had to write a personal message. And if he didn't, she would leave it there and be like, "We are not having cake."
That's a
And many
great
times
thing.
he'd be writing the card as, you know, they're lighting the
Your
cake,
mom, I'm
singing the
stealing-
song.
I'm stealing her idea.
Yeah, yeah.
That's great.
And when we hit high school, she would force him, like, you got to take her out for dinner or, you know, go to lunch. And my dad will still do that. I'm 40 and he'll call and be like, you know, I haven't seen you by myself in a while and I want us to go out. So enforcing that relationship, and enforce is a wrong word because they want to do it.
Yes.
But we're the helpmate, right?
Yeah.
So we have to
Still
help
it,
and
yeah.
encourage to say your relationship with your daughters is really key, that they know they're cherished and loved for who that they are.
And they want it. You just reminded
yeah.
reminded me because my dad used to buy my sisters and I flowers for Valentine's or chocolate
Yep.
and stuff like that. And Valentine's was coming up, and I was telling my husband this, and I said it in front of my daughter, and I said, I missed that. I missed those chocolates. I missed that. Not that I don't get it from my husband, but it's different from your dad.
Right.
And Elena's in the car. She goes, "Dad, what are you buying me? What is my surprise?" And I was like, she really like wanted something from her dad. And I think it
course.
does impact your life. It really does make a difference because you feel like I'm valued. You know what I mean? My dad loved me, then my husband should love me.
Yeah, I don't know who it was that said the biggest gift or the most valuable gift that a father can give to his daughter is to love her mother.
Yeah.
Yes, amen.
Because he exemplifies then
that's
her own dignity and her own value and helps her to realize that this is how a woman should be treated. You know, this is how she should be treated by a man. And so, but you know, unfortunately in the culture that we live in, there's a lot of girls, you know, or children in general that come from broken homes, you know, broken marriages, and some of them grow up without a father. And so, what do you have any
that's a great
ideas?
message.
on how to,
It's something that's commonly presented, you know, in the young women I've worked with over the past few years. And I think it sounds easy, and it is easy for the girls to usually find. Usually if you ask a young woman the question, who's somebody that's kind of like a father figure to you? They will name grandpa or an uncle or, you know, some close friend. So then I always poke through that to make sure it's a safe, stable relationship. We can learn about fatherhood from more than just our biological father.
Yes.
You know, that there really is truth that God has given us, that all men should be raised up to fatherhood. All women should be raised up to motherhood, whether they're our biological children or not. So this idea of community becomes even more important when the family's broken, because you do need, you know, your brothers or your fathers to say, you got to step up and show her this or she will never know it.
Yes.
Going back to Klaus's point, it has to take a village. And sometimes
correct.
it's our responsibility as women to identify those girls who need it.
Right.
And maybe we find that person
Yeah.
for them. Maybe we encourage that uncle instead of the dad. We encourage the brother
Right.
instead of the dad that she might not have. But maybe we need to identify that and be that sisterhood in Christ and say, this is a girl who needs the guidance, and let me help her.
Yeah, and again, it takes that feminine genius
Right.
that has equipped us for the capacity for others. And I know, especially how busy and crazy the world is, that it's more difficult to be a village to others because we're always so busy with our own lives. But that's so important, right? Is having that awareness of the dynamics of your family, yes, but the extended family, as well as maybe sometimes your kids' friends who, you know, don't have that figure in their life, and to say, okay, who can I call? You know, this just happened the other day. So then, you know, who can I call? What can I take a meal over there? Can I just somehow bring Jesus' light into this situation, you know?
I was just talking about this with my sister the other day because she's in her 40s, and I apologize if you're gonna get mad at me for mentioning this, but so she's in her 40s and she never got married and doesn't have kids, and she said, you know what? I don't think I was meant to be a mom. I think I was meant to be that great aunt because we need her so much. My other sisters and I,
You depend on
she is
her.
our backup. She is like the go-to
Right, yeah.
aunt that like, I need help. Can you help me with a project? Can you do this for me? Can you? And all of us sisters that do have the children, we have 6 sisters, she is the person all of us rely on. And it's I think it's so empowering for her to realize that.
Correct,
That
yeah.
that was God's will for her, is that she could be our backup. And to me, she's just as important in my daughter's life as I am. Because she can do things for my daughter that I can't do, that I'm not good at. And I think that's important for us to help other people realize that you don't have to be a mom to be a mother, to be nurturing.
That's wonderful that your daughter has that, but you know, and so I guess then who do you think? I mean, there's so many women that girls are surrounded by. Who do you think that they usually look most to? And so, and what is the responsibility of those women to reflect that? Who?
So I really think that young women today are responding more to what they're seeing in the culture. That the movie stars, you know,
Singers.
yeah. And so one of the things that I work to do with the girls, and I would encourage people to do at home, is you actually point out certain actresses and say, okay, honey, so let's look at what she's wearing. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
You know, there's one young actress that I actually started praying for because as a child, when she was a child actress, you know, she had this really wholesome appearance with everybody, and then that changed as she aged and got into the college age, where now you don't even recognize her from her youth because she's been so used and abused.
Yeah.
And we had talked about it as at the school, and the girls knew it immediately. They could articulate, you know, the change in her. So then it's talking about, well, how does that happen, you know, to us? Because we lose that beauty within because we're letting people trash us for what's without.
Yeah, that's wonderful that actually you look at the fruits that your life has, you know, as a tree, it's like the fruit that you bear. And so
Right.
how we live our lives and the decisions that we make reflect the type of fruit that we bear and how it affects others.
Yeah, and you make your lives look attractive.
Yeah.
You know, if you as working mothers or stay-at-home mothers make your life look attractive and joyful and normal, they're going to want that. They want authenticity, you know, and they want happiness. It's making that seem what the norm is. But I think sometimes we sell ourselves out even as women in the way that we dress or present ourselves in public because we get caught up in what the image is rather than what the reality is. So it's keeping your daughters rooted in the reality of motherhood in family life.
I love the fact that you bring in real life celebrities as an example, because let's face it, that's who they relate to.
Right.
And to use it as an example about the feminine genius. We're running out of time in this segment. It's been a great conversation, and going back to St. Catherine of Siena, the Catholic high school where you're the principal, how can people find out more about the school and itself? Can you give out a website? Or?
Yeah, so we have a website. It's www.stcatherineacademy.org. And we actually have a lot of information about the Feminine Genius on as well. If people want to read more, John Paul's letter to women or other things like that, or certainly send their daughters to come see us.
Yeah. You can tell our viewers that and repeat it so that they can jot it down. That would be awesome.
Yeah, www.stcatherineacademy.org.
Thanks, Karen, for being with us and being part of this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was a pleasure. Stay with us, everyone. We're going to wrap up the show, and of course, we're going to share with you, as always, our Sisterhood Pledge. And welcome back to the wrap-up of this segment of An Invitation to Sisterhood. We've been talking about raising girls as the feminine genius, and we thank Karen Irvin from St. Catherine of Siena for being with us. And what a great conversation. And I've learned a lot as a mom here today, and the challenges girls face, and raising girls as the feminine genius, and even understanding it more today.
Karen definitely had some really good insights for us to reflect on and then to take away from and
implement. There's a couple things that she said, as even the way we have our conversations with our daughter, that I'm going to use.
I think that one was the aha moment for me was when she brought it down to that realistic, practical level of saying, this is how you have the conversation with your daughter.
Yes.
Because like you said, in class, it's very common for us to want to tell our daughters what we would do, instead of listening to, well, how would you handle this? You know, and at the same time, you're kind of figuring out where their mind is at, you know, what's going on with them.
Absolutely.
We do have to keep in mind, too, that, you know, when we grew up, it was a lot different. I do think that there's a whole lot more pressure on girls today on being a certain way. And so which you would think, you know, would require us to even be more open and talkative with our girls about everything. So, you know, for me personally, I discuss everything with my children. Politics, you know, what's going on within our families. And we use those as examples, you know, and ways of reflecting on what is good and what is not good. And, you know, and where our focus should be when making those kinds of decisions. So, and that's really, those are all, you know, those all prepare them to make better decisions as things come their way, because that message of, you know, of dignity and of respect and of love and doing the right thing is constantly in the picture throughout all your conversations.
Because we're exposed to so much,
yes,
right? I mean,
yes.
You're right. We were raised differently because the world was different.
Yeah.
We didn't have the internet. We walked to the mailbox to get mail. I mean,
Yes.
we didn't get instant emails.
Yes.
You know, I was just complaining to May during one of our breaks is that, you know, I'm gone away from my phone and I've got like 7 texts and 20 emails, and my phone rang about 4 or 5 times, and we're bombarded, and I'm an adult and I'm exhausted.
Yes.
Imagine our kids. And
Well, that reminds me of another thing that Karen said, and we've been trying to implement this at our home, and it's been a challenge for some more than others. But to take the cell phone and put it on the kitchen counter at some point and say, that's it, it's just us, you know? And to sit down and have dinner together as a family, to create that space that's warm and loving and hospitable, to have those conversations, right? I just feel like there's just so many things that are attacking the family. We have to be that much more vigilant and creative to try to come up with ways to, you know, to sustain it, And I'm curious, May, because you have kids that are older, and then you have a younger child
Gabriel
also.
is 12.
So how do you find time with your family? And I know your kids are all busy, and you have a lot of responsibility. Is it the kitchen table where you're, you know, the dinner table where you're having those conversations mostly, or?
Honestly, it's in the car. It's, it's getting ready, to maybe work on the yard.
Yeah.
It's anywhere that the topic comes up. And so really there's no, I mean, yes, obviously when you're all together as a family, those are the perfect times, but really there is no, anytime that you have opportunities, take them.
Yes.
Take them and use them.
Well, don't you think your kids talk to you, they relax at certain times of the day? Okay, so like for my daughter, it's in the car,
Yes.
or it's at the very end of the day before we
Yes.
go to bed.
Yes.
And all of a sudden she started talking to me, Mom, do you know what
Yes.
happened in school today? Or do you know what so-and-so said to me? And
Yes.
it was not me probing
Yes.
anything. It was just her starting to talk.
So you have to bask in those. You know why? Because those end at some point.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it is.
I
when
record
the
some
kids-
of them because I want to go back when she's 4 or 5.
That's a great idea.
And I recorded them.
Because when they're young, they do. I remember that. It was right at bedtime when the kids wanted to share and open up. So then that changes, of course, and
Yeah.
depending on how old your child is. I think for me, because my kids are both teens now, it's basically waiting for an opportunity where they do feel relaxed to start up a conversation like that. And even that has taken so much practice and patience on my part because I can be so demanding sometimes. And I mentioned my perfectionistic ways, and we've talked about that, you and
Yeah.
I, May, and our struggle with that. So it's really waiting for those, those times when they are relaxed, or really when they ask you a question about something and the topic comes up.
And it may not be about them. Like we talked about,
Yes.
sometimes opening those topics up in an indirect way by, the news with what's going on, or maybe they might relate to you or give you some information about something that happened to their friend or something that they
Yes.
heard happened to someone else, and it's
Yes.
usually something terrible that someone
Yes.
did. And you use that, and you don't judge while you're doing that.
Yes.
You always, maintain that non-judgmental, not judging the person, and you start to, so to speak,
Be charitable.
Yeah, be charitable to, you're not judging the person, you're using it as an example.
Yes, but
It's kind of like the video I showed you. You don't want to judge the girls because they made a bad mistake,
Right.
but it's a teachable moment.
right, and that's really how you reinforce those messages that you want them to have, which end up being their tools. And at the same time too, we have to remember that how open we are to them and the communication that we build with them is they're going to take that with them as parents. So, because there's a bigger picture with that. I mean, I remember my mom was not a very talkative person. She didn't talk to us about this stuff at all. It's her generation.
Yeah,
my mom,
it's a different
my sweet
time
mother.
period.
Yeah, but growing up here in the States, I think, thankfully God gave me sisters. I have 5 of them, and they all played. They all mothered me, and equipped me, so that I was able to, to be the mother that my children needed in my time, in their time, rather than, so I think keeping that in mind too. I keep it in mind only because I know that my poor parents, who came to the States, weren't able to really give me those tools in regards to the
They came from another country. I mean, our parents came
Right.
from another country into a new country, and not only were they dealing with a generation gap, they were dealing with a cultural gap. There was a big difference. But just like you said, you tell your kids to put the phone on the counter. I have to, as a parent, learn to put my phone on the counter.
Yes.
Because if my daughter constantly sees me distracted, she'll feel like neglected and that I don't care about her.
Well, that's part of the spiritual battle. I think the technology is something that all of us are struggling with. Everyone that you talk to, how many people have you talked to that said, I wish I could go back to the days when there were no cell phones,
Oh, yeah.
when life was simpler, when you did have time, to spend. But I did want to touch on one other point that Karen made before we go, and that is that what she said about the importance of the men in our lives and our role and our capacity to shape the men in our life as the feminine genius, and how important that is for family and for society.
We're going to have a show just on that.
We are.
We're really going to do.
We really are.
Along with your suggestion to have Pope Francis write a letter to men.
To men, that's
great
right.
suggestion, class.
Yes.
We'll get that out there. Well, this has been a great show. We've had a great time, and thanks again for Karen for being on the show and talking about the feminine genius. And don't go away, because as always, we close our show with the Sisterhood Pledge, and we share it with you to take one or two of them with you. It's a takeaway, and pray about it and see how one or two of those can change your life.
I pledge to read St. Pope John Paul's letter to women. I pledge to reflect on the role models I bring into my family. I pledge to pray for my children to have Christ-centered friends. I pledge to help the women in my life to raise men to holiness. I pledge to look for ways to be part of the village that it takes to raise a family.